Hello guys, welcome back to Anime Moments. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Against the Gods based on novel. So let's start explanation. Extreme Mirage Lightning. This movement skill, can it be transferred to another person? Yun Che asked earnestly. Hua Minghai stilled his expression, then shook his head in fear and agony. Sorry, benefactor. I'll never hesitate in whatever you want me to do, but only this. Extreme Mirage Lightning is my clan's treasure bestowed upon us by heaven, and also our biggest taboo that can never be passed on to others. I understand. Yun Che nodded. A clan's profound techniques are originally not supposed to be spread out. I was being rude. Take proper care of your wife. After he finished speaking, Yun Che turned, leaving with slow steps. Benefactor. Hua Minghai looked at Yun Che's departing back, gritting his teeth with a face full of shame. What Yun Che had given him was no doubt a favor as big as the sky. He could easily accomplish the only thing he wanted, yet he just couldn't do it. He was a man who hated owing a debt of gratitude to another, let alone such a great kindness. This kind of feeling made his heart feel unbearable pain. Don't take it to heart. Yun Che executed a backward wave. You should be using all your energy on your wife at the moment. Don't be distracted by something that doesn't matter. Saving a life can also be considered to be for the purpose of redeeming a bit of my sins. If you really want to repay me, then work hard to help your wife recover faster, which would not make me saving her be in vain. As his voice fell, Yun Che's figure had already disappeared into the dark of night. Hua Minghai looked up ahead, not uttering a single word for a long while, with a complicated, indescribable expression on his face, as though he was struggling intensely about something. I never thought that you, someone who treats human life like grass, who would annihilate an entire clan without blinking, would actually waste energy to save someone who has nothing to do with you. Jasmine said with an extremely indifferent tone of voice. This proves that I am still inherently a good person, right? Jasmine snorted. By the time Yun Che returned to the inn, it was already the middle of the night. When he went back in his room, just as he was intending to push the door open while standing right at the doorway, his hands suddenly stiffened as both his brows sunk. All the nerves on his entire body had also instantly stretched taut. Because he clearly felt that there was someone in his room. The person hidden in his room was superb at concealment. If it was only by his profound strength, and not spiritual sense, it would be impossible for him to discover his existence. Once he perceived this person's existence, a kind of hair-raising, chilling sensation came right after. This kind of sensation told him that not only was the person inside terrifyingly strong, this person was here to kill him. Quickly, leave. It's someone at the 8th level of the Emperor Profound Realm. He has already detected you. Under Jasmine's quick warning, Yun Che no longer had time to think as he Star Gods broken shadowed out of the inn and quickly dashed out. Crash! The door and walls being completely smashed sounded behind him as a scorching wave of wind also screamed from behind. This kind of burning sensation was clearly Phoenix Flame. Someone from Divine Phoenix Sect. Yun Che's heart grew heavy. Why was it someone from Divine Phoenix Sect? And this killing intent clearly wanted to put him to death. Could it be Feng Shichen? Yun Che's heart turned. Looks like it was due to the events back then, when he had revealed his phoenix flames in broad daylight, in Falling Flame Merchant Guild, and was mistaken as a Divine Phoenix Sect disciple, which allowed Divine Phoenix Sect to obtain news of him. They followed the clues to then find where he resided. Seems like he had been too careless then. He was too preoccupied with noticing Hua Minghai that he had subconsciously forgotten this key fact. In Divine Phoenix City, Divine Phoenix Sect spies were everywhere. Yun Che's speed obviously could not match a strong practitioner at the later stages of the Emperor Profound. In less than 10 breaths, he had already chased to the point where there was only 60 meters between them. A violent wave of phoenix flame broke through the air at him. Reap. The phoenix flame, that had been violently ignited in the air, was especially luminous in the night sky. Yunche quickly dodged, avoiding the phoenix flame. Then, his heart steeled as he stopped to turn around. The person chasing him also stopped without overtaking him, because before his eyes was his pitiful prey that simply could not escape his grasp. "Who are you?" Yunche asked with sunken brows. The other party's gaze swept across his body, then laughed coldly. "You do indeed have the aura of Phoenix profound strength. You are indeed the rumored bastard. Yunche. I never thought that you would actually arrive so early." "Heh," Yunche coldly laughed in turn. "Look like your divine Phoenix sect is scared of me." "Scared of you? Right?" Yunche ridiculed. "I came to Divine Phoenix City with the intent to settle the bloodline dispute with your Divine Phoenix sect openly and honorably at the 7-nation ranking tournament. But you Divine Phoenix sect are actually using such an unpresentable method like assassination. Seems like the so-called Divine Phoenix sect is only this much." "Ha ha," the middle-aged man laughed disdainfully. "In our Divine Phoenix sect's eyes, you are merely a little reptile that had stolen our sect's bloodline. My sect is scared of a pathetic little reptile. Truly a joke as large as the heavens. Today is just because 13th Prince wants your life." As expected, Yunche's gaze became even colder. A mere reptile from Blue Wind actually dares to offend 13th Prince. Even if the Blue Wind Emperor kneels to beg for forgiveness on your behalf, you should not even think of living past tonight. However, dying in my, Fengchua's hands, is enough to brag about when you go to the netherworld and enter the reincarnation cycle. Calmly meet your maker. Fengchua's figure swayed. Then he suddenly charged at Yunche with phoenix flames ignited on all 5 of his fingers, aiming for Yunche's chest. It was evident that he wanted to kill him in one strike. 8th level of the Emperor Profound Realm, a genuine high-level throne, against one at merely the Earth Profound Realm. If an instant kill was impossible, even he would feel that it was funny. Yunche's gaze flashed as he stepped to Star God's broken shadow, instantly splitting out 3 false images, dooming Fengchua's grab to miss. Sucking in a deep breath, he gathered all the profound energy in his body and quickly fled toward the south. The moment he grabbed empty air, Fengchua was stunned. He was actually unable to clearly see how Yunche had dodged with his eyesight, and the rate in which Yunche had fled right after had shocked him even more. He clearly was only at the Earth Profound Realm, but his speed was no less inferior to that of a low-level throne. HMPH. As expected, he has some skill. Fengchua snorted coldly, as a trace of anger surfaced in his heart. Even though Yunche's speed was way faster than what he had expected, this kind of speed still could not escape the palm of his hands. Besides, Yunche only had profound strength at the Earth Profound Realm. It was impossible for him to fly, so he had no other choice but to run on ground, which meant that he could never escape his line of sight, nor his perception. "Rat, let's see where you'll run to." Fengchua growled. His entire body flew after Yunche like an arrow from a bow. The shocking speed brought along the exceptionally ear-piercing sound of air being broken. Under the distinct difference in speed, within several tens of breaths, Yunche was once again chased to 60 meters of difference. Yunche, who was on the run, suddenly turned around again, and tossed a pitch-black thing at the Fengchua in midair. The waning moon in the sky was completely hidden from view by the primordial profound arc, making the night as black as ink. Fengchua heard a sharp whistling sound in front of him, yet couldn't clearly see what it was. He didn't dare to use his body to obstruct it, for fear that the other party had tossed out a toxic poison. He quickly dodged to the side, and once it had brushed past him, did he clearly see that it was only an ordinary stone. It was probably a random stone Yun-Che had casually picked up during his escape. Whoosh! The sound of something breaking through the air resounded once more, and Feng Chihua's gaze grew disdainful. Casually slapping the stone into pieces, he sneered, "Truly a hilarious struggle. Are you still dreaming about escaping the palms of your lord's hands?" After a few breaths, Yun-Che had already been chased to a distance of 45 meters apart. His expression was still, and he turned around again, as a pitch-black object flew out of his hands once more. 45 meters of distance was already inside Feng Chihua's attack range. He began to condense profound energy in his hand, and directly met that object. Without even looking at what it was, he casually slapped it away. Boom! The sound of profound thunder from the 9 heavens resounded within Divine Phoenix City's quiet midnight. An enormous energy storm violently exploded in mid-air. From far away, it was as though an extremely magnificent firework had exploded in the sky. The first 2 stones were merely a pretense tossed out by Yun-Che. But the third one was the heaven-decimating orb Yun-Che had obtained from the body of Xiao Wui. Heaven-decimating orb's might was incomparably large, enough to severely injure a low-level throne. With Feng Chihua's abilities, if he had used all his strength to defend, it might actually be difficult for the heaven-decimating orb to bring about substantial injuries. However, in the cat-chasing mouse game-like manner he used to pursue Yun-Che, he simply did not defend at all. Inside the blaze brought about by the heaven-decimating orb, his entire left arm had been completely fried inside out, dripping with fresh blood. His entire phoenix robe had been burst into pieces. It was so powerful that even his chest, both arms, and face were littered with wounds all over. His hair had even been half-bombed, changing into a field of rough disorder. He looked miserable to the extreme. As for Yun-Che, he had fled long ago, not a trace of him could be found. Even though there were many wounds, they were all just minor injuries, only the injury on his left arm was a bit severe. Compared to his external injuries, Feng Chihua's chest had nearly burst from rage. He looked at his arm with a vicious expression as his entire body shook. He, a grand, high-level throne of Divine Phoenix sect, had actually been reduced to such a miserable shape by a mere junior of the Earth-profound realm. This was the biggest humiliation of his entire life. Yun-Che, I'm going to rip you into 10,000 pieces. Feng Chihua's hair stood erect as his entire body combusted with a violent blaze. With a loud roar and a towering fury, he used his greatest speed to chase forward. His perception had also been released to its maximum. After running in his quickest speed possible for a distance, Yun-Che had instead slowed down, then used all his power to control the fluctuation of his profound strength. To an escapee, night time was the best time for hiding, but at the same time, in the completely quiet night, even the most minute of movement would echo through the silence. Feng Shichen had indeed ordered someone to kill him before the ranking tournament, and his mobilization was actually this fast. He had already been discovered, and Divine Phoenix City was also full of Divine Phoenix sect spies. In that case, Divine Phoenix City was no longer a suitable place for him to stay before the ranking tournament. Before dawn, he had to stay hidden from Feng Chihua's pursuit and leave Divine Phoenix City at the same time. As he was currently being hunted, Yun-Che's mind would find itself at its most clearest state. Inside the darkness, in Divine Phoenix City, a place he was not at all familiar with, he was displaying his concealing and evading abilities to their peaks. Going along a strange and unpredictable route, he quickly approached the southern part of Divine Phoenix City. Time slowly passed by in the night, and the milky white color of twilight began to emerge from the eastern sky. Yun-Che could already see Divine Phoenix City's tall, majestic southern gate in his field of vision. And in this boundless night, Feng Chihua, who was crazily searching for him overhead, could not find any trace of him. Yun-Che took in a deep breath, made himself look completely natural, and then walked toward the city gate. Just as he approached, he was obstructed by two heavily armored city guards. Orders from the imperial palace. Before 7 in the morning today, no one is allowed to exit the city. Violators will be arrested on the spot. The 7-nation ranking tournament was in more than 10 days, and the influx of people coming in Divine Phoenix City could be said to be increasing day by day. At this time, how could the city gates suddenly be sealed off? The greatest possibility was that Feng Chihua was angry that he couldn't find him through the entire night. Since he was angry to the point where he would have fainted and revived several times, he contacted Feng Shichen to pass down an order to temporarily seal off the city gates, allowing people to enter but not leave. Yun Che moved 2 steps back. A few ideas quickly flashed through his mind, then, he suddenly accelerated, forcefully knocking the 2 city guards aside as he charged forward. Stop him! Yun Che's action was no different from poking a hornet's nest. Several tens of city guards nearby immediately rushed over. Yun Che lifted Dragon Fault and swept across, without even looking at his surroundings. The might of the Berserk heavy sword was like a doomsday windstorm that ruthlessly scattered the besieging city guards flying. They couldn't get up for a long while, and even the weapons in their hands had been instantly destroyed. The fact that the sky was only slightly bright, added to the fact that no one would dare be impetuous in Divine Phoenix City, meant that the city guards were relatively weak. Even though they had received the order to blockade the city gates were still wide open, not shut. After Yun Che swept away the obstacles, without waiting for them to react, he had already rushed out of the city gates with an extremely fast speed. As he stepped outside the city, he summoned the Snow Phoenix, then flew off into the distance. Quick, notify Lord Chihua. A city guard yelled out with all his strength. 15 minutes later, a current of heat hurtled above the city gates, directly chasing in the direction Yun Che had fled. It was precisely Feng Chihua. The order Feng Shichen gave him was for him to assassinate Yun Che secretly. Not only was no one to know about it, he wasn't supposed to leave behind any traces. But it was clear that Feng Chihua was already muddled by his anger. In order to thoroughly kill Yun Che, he had even brought about such a commotion. After all, being played with by a mere earth-profound junior to a battered and exhausted state was a humiliation he had never suffered before. If he didn't kill Yun Che, it would be difficult for him to eliminate the hatred in his heart. The Snow Phoenix beast's speed was naturally faster than Yun Che by several-fold. Even if Feng Chihua went searching in the right direction, it was impossible for him to catch up in a short while. However, Yun Che was completely unfamiliar with the terrain outside Divine Phoenix City. The map Kang Yu had prepared for him only contained the route from Blue Wind Imperial City to Divine Phoenix City, as well as Divine Phoenix City's basic composition. There were no marks or anything about the topography outside Divine Phoenix City. Whether or not he was able to find a place to completely throw off Feng Chihua was entirely left up to fate and luck. And it was inevitable that Feng Chihua, as a member of Divine Phoenix sect, was extremely familiar with this region. At the same time, even though the Snow Phoenix's speed was fast, wherever it went, it would leave behind a sliver of cold air that would very likely turn into a trail that could be followed. Under Yun Che's urging, the Snow Phoenix's speed finally reached its peak. Like a streak of lightning, it rapidly flitted across the sky. In the blink of an eye, it was already several tens of kilometers away from Divine Phoenix City. On the way forward, Yun Che's expression was tranquil yet dark. Most of the space around Divine Phoenix City was spacious. It was hard to find somewhere to hide. After an hour, the feeling of being pursued still did not come from behind, but Yun Che did not relax at all. He was certain that Feng Chihua would not give up in his chase. The reason why he had not been overtaken was because the Snow Phoenix was not slower than Feng Chihua by much. Yun Che couldn't help but think of Hua Minghai. In terms of profound strength level, he could not amount to even 1/10 of Feng Chihua. However, in terms of speed, he was much more faster than Feng Chihua. If he could cultivate that extreme mirage lightning, he could effortlessly throw off Feng Chihua. The only profound movement skill he possessed was Star God's Broken Shadow. Even though Star God's Broken Shadow was incomparably mysterious, it was limited to combat. Its existence perfectly made up for the heavy sword's largest flaw, allowing Yun Che to still wield a heavy sword that was several tens of thousands of kilograms in weight like a phantom. But Star God's Broken Shadow's activation was only an instantaneous, short displacement. It was absolutely not used for normal high-speed movements. An endless range of mountains appeared on Yun Che's southwest side. Inside the mountain range were innumerable mountain peaks. The highest mountain was at least 3,000 meters high. His heart stirred as he changed direction, speeding toward the row of mountains. Soon enough, he charged into the mountain range like a shooting star. Once he entered the mountain range, an abnormal scorching sensation blasted forward, startling a few birds, scattering them about. These birds were completely red in color, and their bodies released a fiery aura. As soon as he entered the mountain range, what he should have seen was green grass everywhere while feeling a slightly cold mountain wind, but once Yun Che went deeper in, he'd actually sensed that the air had distinctively gotten hotter. Every sort of vegetation also grew everywhere, but most of the plants here were red in color. Furthermore, they all released the smell of ignited flame. 90% of the profound beasts he encountered on the way were also all fire attribute profound beasts. Don't tell me it's because this place is close to Divine Phoenix City, and has something to do with the strong fire element within Divine Phoenix City. After flying around for 2 hours, there still was no trace of Feng Chihua coming from behind, as though he had completely thrown him off. Yun Che slowed down and the snow phoenix dropped from the sky, continuously descending until they were not even 300 meters high, to hide in the many layers of mountains. Jasmine's low voice suddenly resounded within Yun Che's mind. This place is somewhat different than usual. Different from usual? Where are you talking about? Yun Che immediately asked. I thought that this place's heat came from the volcano nearby, or is from a high concentrated fire element zone. But when I probed earlier, I discovered that this place has exceptionally active fire elemental particles that actually come from an enormous, hidden profound formation that's extremely deep underground. The entire mountain range is enveloped in this profound formation. If I'm not mistaken, this enormous profound formation ought to have been set up by Divine Phoenix sect around 8,000 years ago. At the same time, it also means that this mountain range is Divine Phoenix sect's territory. It seems like you came to a place that you really shouldn't have entered. Rat, let's see where you'll run off to this time. Just as Jasmine's voice fell, a loud angry roar resounded near Yun Che's ears. This voice came from up ahead. Yun Che raised his head. Feng Chihua stood on a low mountain top in front of him with both hands behind his back. Even though there was a great difference between them, he could still sense the surging fury released from his body. At first, Feng Chihua thought that sending him, a throne at the 8th rank, to personally assassinate him was like killing chicken with a butcher knife for cows. It was simply an insult to his status and ability. If not for the fact that Feng Shichen had personally ordered him, he absolutely wouldn't be willing to do so. However, once he found his target, such an extremely simple mission that insulted his rank had not gone smoothly at all. Instead, he had been dirted by the other party's heaven-decimating orb. Within these several hours, Feng Chihua's fury had not ceased. If not for the fact that his body was resilient, his chest would have burst open several tens of times due to his rage. Yun Che was secretly shocked. If he had been overtaken by Feng Chihua from behind, he would not be this shocked, because not only was Feng Chihua's speed faster than the Snow Phoenix's, his familiarity with this Divine Phoenix region had far surpassed his. However, what shocked him was that Feng Chihua appeared in front of him at such a close distance, but he had never detected him. Jasmine knew what Yunche was thinking, and said in a low voice, "Looks like there's big trouble up ahead. This profound formation that's at least 8,000 years old is not that simple." Yunche's brows sunk. Then, he clutched at the snow phoenix's snowy feathers on its back and yelled, "Little Chan, go." The snow phoenix beast rapidly turned around, changing into a streak of an extremely fast white silhouette, as it wildly flew in the opposite direction. From behind, came Feng Chihua's loud roar, "You still want to flee? No matter where you go, even if you have 100 lives, don't even think about escaping." The snow phoenix's speed reached its pinnacle as it quickly dove down, and the mountain range on the side quickly drew back, forming two long and narrow ravines. Yunche glanced backwards with clenched fists, urging the snow phoenix to suppress its aviation, to not fly higher than 30 meters. As they approached the ravine, he channeled Frozen End Divine Arts, instantly activating Frozen End Illusory Mirror. At the same time, it enveloped him and the snow phoenix within, isolating their auras to a great extent. Then, he extended an arm, and allowed the profound handle to fly off into the other ravine. This was a trick he used to disorientate those who chased after him. It was well tried, and had never been defeated before. Behind him, Feng Chihua pursued with a speed that wasn't too fast, and in front of him was a bizarre, slowly revolving, fire-red profound formation. A white dot slowly moved inside the profound formation. As he looked at this white dot, Feng Chihua exposed a ridiculing sneer. Right at this moment, his brows suddenly moved, because he suddenly felt that the direction in which the white dot in the profound formation was moving was not the direction that Yunche's aura went. A huge discrepancy had actually appeared. What happened? How could a discrepancy appear on the Great Phoenix Formation? Feng Chihua stared blankly for a while. As he raised both his hands, the hovering red-colored profound formation in front of him slowly enlarged. Along with the phoenix profound strength Feng Chihua poured into the profound formation, it spun quickly. Then, two distinct scenes slowly appeared. In one image was Yunche flying really fast on a snow phoenix. In the other was, shockingly, an extremely fast, flying orange-yellow stream of light. Yunche's aura Feng Chihua sensed had actually came from the stream of light. Its aura and Yunche's aura were exactly the same. Seeing the orange-colored stream of light, Feng Chihua was first stunned, then, his pupils slowly contracted as his face revealed an expression of deep shock and incredibility. After a while, two words containing deep astonishment came out of his mouth. Profound. Handle. The snow phoenix quickly passed through the ravine. As he looked onward, the highest mountain peak was already before his eyes. It was no less than 4,500 meters tall. Feng Chihua did not chase over, but Yunche still did not sigh in relief. Instead, he felt that something was fishy. He felt as if a pair of eyes had continuously been staring at him all along. How could that be possible? Was I wrong? Run, keep running, let me see how far you can run to. Feng Chihua's voice suddenly resounded, and it still came from up ahead. Yunche's complexion slightly changed as he raised his head. Not even 90 meters up ahead was a leisurely floating Feng Chihua with an amused expression. However, Yunche unexpectedly did not feel any killing intent from him, and even his anger had dissipated by a lot. This time, Yunche was completely certain that the feeling of being watched was not his misconception. The Feng Chihua before him was obviously using some sort of method to lock onto his movements, and what helped him was most likely the profound formation, which covered the entire mountain range that Jasmine mentioned. This time, Yunche didn't flee at once. He coldly stared at Feng Chihua. "Are you using this place's profound formation to track me? Oh? You are actually able to sense the Great Phoenix Formation here. Oh. I almost forgot, you are also someone with the Phoenix bloodline. Otherwise, you would not have been able to enter. Feng Zhihua walked closer and laughed coldly. Your concealment abilities were truly unexpected. To actually make me search for you without finding a single trace of your shadow until dawn. If you fled to some other place, you might have been able to escape me, but you just happened to rush here. I've lived for 100 years, and have never seen such a perfect example of the saying walking straight into a trap. Great Phoenix Formation. What exactly is this place? This is Phoenix Mountain Range, a place Divine Phoenix sect uses to evaluate disciples of the young generation. Up till here, Feng Zhihua was no longer worried about Yunche escaping the palms of his hand. He continued calmly, and only those with the Phoenix bloodline may enter. Other humans that approach would be repelled by the Great Phoenix Formation. Since it's an appraisal ground, we obviously have to monitor each and every disciple's movements. And I just happen to be one of the supervisors of this Phoenix Mountain Range. With the help of the Great Phoenix Formation, I can control everything here, even so much that I can travel through the space here using the Great Phoenix Formation. Yunche. I had already known where you were the exact instant you entered the Phoenix Mountain Range. It's just that you were more crafty than I thought you were, so I didn't immediately take action to avoid you fleeing the Phoenix Mountain Range. Instead, I allowed you to go deeper in, all the way to here. Feng Zhihua gazed straight at Yunche, then extended a palm. You are now like a turtle in a jar. Even if you dream about it, you should not think about escaping. But don't you worry, I suddenly don't feel like killing you anymore, because something that would greatly interest Sect Master, and even the 4 great sacred grounds, has appeared on your body. I didn't expect that not only are you a bastard of our Phoenix bloodline, you're also a demon from illusory demon realm. I've clearly seen the profound handle you used earlier. Yunche's expression immediately sunk, as an extremely strong killing intent flashed through his eyes. Yunche's overall strength had no doubt increased exponentially after awakening his profound handle, but he'd actually never used his profound handle in real combat before. Even when he had nearly been forced into a dire strait by Ling Qianni, he still did not think about using his profound handle. This was because while ordinary people might not recognize the profound handle, Heavenly Sword Villa, which was linked with mighty Heavenly Sword region in countless ways, might recognize it. And the profound handle was a godly technique possessed only by illusory demon realm's Yun family. As head of the illusory demon royal family's 12 guardian families, the Yun family was no doubt one of the 4 great sacred grounds' greatest enemies. An illusory demon realm had long been made into demons by the 4 great sacred grounds. Once the profound handle was exposed, not only would the 4 great sacred grounds come at him, everyone within the 7 nations would regard him as a demon. If that happens, there would not be a single place in the entire profound sky continent that he could seek shelter. The consequences were 10 million times more grave than exposing his phoenix flame. Both of Yunche's hands tightened as his eyes became bone-piercingly cold. Previously, he'd used all his might to escape, but now, he absolutely could not run anymore. This person, who recognized his profound handle, he had to die. No matter what, no matter how large of a cost he had to pay, he had to kill him. Run, why aren't you running? Have you resigned to your fate? Or have you already been scared witless? Feng Zhihua laughed wildly. Forget it. I ought to end our game of cat chasing mouse by now. Even though I spent so much time on you, with such an unexpected harvest, I can't say that I've suffered any losses. I've even heard that you're the Blue Wind Emperor's son-in-law. TSK, TSK. If that damned Emperor of Blue Wind Nation and the other inferior nations were to know that a mighty prince consort was a demon from illusory demon realm, I'm not sure how marvelous of a reaction they would have. Ha ha. After laughing to his content, Feng Zhihua's face suddenly became darkened. even though I'm not going to kill you, once I give you to Sectmaster. I'll make you live a life worse than death. The debts you incurred after playing tricks on me. I'll properly calculate them now. Feng Chihua suddenly swooped down from the sky. With a sudden wave of his arm, a 6-meter-wide column of fire instantly shot downwards. Just as it was about to approach Yunche, it changed into a fire phoenix that danced in midair. As the temperature boiled, it nearly melted the ground. Yunche was not the least bit afraid of phoenix fire, but the profound energy attack of a high-level throne was still within the flame. Yunche's complexion grew grim, as he instantly raised Dragon Fault. With a loud roar, the heavy sword force swung upwards against the air, straight for the fire phoenix. Whoosh! Phoenix flame and the heavy sword's windstorm directly clashed head-on. Yunche's hair had been blown up by the chaos as a distorted expression appeared on his face. The heavy sword force only lasted for half a breath before it had been completely smashed apart. The fire phoenix crazily descended, charging at Yunche and the snow phoenix. The sound of phoenix fire exploding roiled like surging thunder, as the incomparably terrifying heat suddenly inflated the surrounding space. Yunche's groans and the snow phoenix's mournful cries came from within the blaze. One was knocked to the east while the other was knocked to the west. Little Chan. The snow phoenix lost its balance. As though it was a dead leaf that was being swirled inside a gale, it fell several hundred meters away. 2 stretches of ghastly blood red had quickly spread on the originally snow-white pair of wings. After landing on the ground, it no longer made another sound. It was, after all, only a sky-profound beast. How could it withstand an attack from a high-level throne? Bang! Yunche also heavily fell down. The fierce attack smashed 2 enormous holes on the ground. After he fell, the clothes on Yunche's entire body were broken into pieces, dyed all over with bloodstains. All 4 of his limbs twitched unceasingly, and it seemed as if he used all his strength to lift Dragon Fault. While struggling to finally stand, he panted with his mouth open in huge coarse breaths. Jasmine, with my current body, what is the maximum time I can maintain purgatory? Yunche asked grimly. Jasmine was also very clear that since Feng Chihua recognized Yunche's profound handle, he had to die no matter what. If he wanted to kill Feng Chihua, he had to forcibly open Purgatory's gate. She said carefully, 15 breaths. As for the most extreme limit, it cannot exceed 20 breaths. Otherwise, all the blood vessels in your body will rupture, even your great way of the Buddha won't be able to save you. TSK, not bad. No wonder our prince had specially sent me to kill you. You do have some ability. After receiving a move that contains 30% of my strength, you actually had not been beaten half dead, and can even stand up. Feng Chihua casually dropped from mid-air toward Yunche. The disdain in his eyes was as though he was looking at lamb about to be slaughtered. He moved his wrist, as malice flickered in his eyes. You made quite a bit of blood flow from this arm of mine. There are even a few cracks that have appeared in my bones. In order to repay this favor of yours, tell me, should I snap every bone in your body, or pinch each and every one of them into pieces? Yunche clenched his teeth and forcibly lifted the heavy sword as his entire body tottered on the verge of collapse. Even if I die, even if I have to risk my life, I'm still going to leave a few more injuries on your body. After he finished speaking, Yunche roared. Swinging the heavy sword up, he smashed toward Feng Chihua, who was only 3 steps away from him. Ha 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 ha. The incoming heavy sword did not have the least bit of imposingness. Rather, it seemed as if it was about to fall from Yunche's grasp any moment. Feng Chihua laughed out loud as he extended a hand to grab at Dragon Fault. You alone can actually injure. Just as Feng Chihua's hand was about to touch Dragon Fault, Yunche's expression suddenly changed. Purgatory opened and Yunche, who was on the verge of collapse, seemed like a ferocious beast that had suddenly awakened from the abyss, as his entire body bursted with an incredibly frightening strength. Falling moon, sinking star. A sky-tremoring dragon cry came from Dragon Fault, as the ground beneath Yun Che's feet suddenly shook. Cracks resembling spider webs crazily spread. This sudden variation greatly changed Feng Chihua's complexion. At such a close range, even if he was a deity, he would still not have time to react. That one strike, brimming with all of Yun Che's power, ruthlessly smashed on his arm. Boom! The cracking sound of bone disintegrating was drowned within a world-shaking explosion. The surrounding mountain stones were all twisted upwards by the heavy sword tornado, then, they were all crushed into the most minute of fragmented dust. Feng Chihua's left elbow bone had been directly smashed broken. Under the enormous attack, his entire person flew like a spinning top, as he was smashed 300 meters away, firmly ramming into a large mountain boulder, crushing it into smithereens. With Yun Che's strength, defeating Ling Qianni at the 6th level of the Emperor Profound Realm required the joint help of Xie Qingyu. In normal instances, prevailing over Feng Chihua at the 8th level of the Emperor Profound Realm was something he had no chance of ever doing. If he was able to sustain purgatory, he might be able to confront Feng Chihua, but it was also near impossible. Besides, he could only maintain the purgatory state for at most 15 breaths. After 15 breaths, he would be toying with fate, and after 20 breaths, he would be courting death. And the only hope he had to kill Feng Chihua was to utilize all his strength and willpower, so much that he had to overdraft his life force. At the same time, he had to use any kind of tactics and tricks, no matter how shameless and despicable they were. With Yun Che's current body strength, Feng Chihua's attack that contained 30% of his strength was still a fire attribute attack. It was impossible to place him in too miserable of a state. Even the utterly tattered clothes and those numerous little wounds were all devised by him. They were all for this one moment. And the results were even better than what he had anticipated, directly crippling one of Feng Chihua's arms. Facing Feng Chihua, who only had one arm left, his chances had naturally gotten better. Feng Chihua got up from the crushed rocks with an extremely angry snarl. His entire left arm dangled, its shape appearing to be hideously twisted. His right arm grabbed onto it as he felt intolerable pain. With most of the bones in his left arm broken, he howled, as if insane, "Yun Che, I'm going to tear you into 10,000 pieces." Feng Chihua had lived for over 100 years, his combat experience was incomparably rich, so he was definitely not one of those who were arrogant and condescending. On the contrary, even when facing an opponent weaker than himself, he would still be very cautious. However, Yun Che was just too weak. Earth Profound Realm was 2 great realms weaker than him. How could he possibly be on guard? A fierce tiger going up against a wounded wolf might be on guard, but how could a tiger be on guard against a wounded young rabbit? The acute pain in his arm was unbearable, yet far beneath the shock in his heart. The power Yun Che suddenly exploded out with just a while ago was only a strength a high-level throne could put forth. How could it appear from a profound practitioner at the Earth Profound Realm? Just as he let out a howl, the figure before him swayed, and Yun Che had already attacked again, bringing along an imposing force not weaker than before. His eyes especially flickered with a blood-red radiance. Die! Instantly submerging in his anger and hatred, Feng Chihua roared as his right arm shot out. The palm he poured his berserking profound energy in directly grabbed at Yun Che's chest, with the intent to immediately tear Yun Che's heart into pieces. Due to the arm that had been smashed broken, why would he care whether or not Yun Che was a demon from illusory demon realm? Under his extreme fury, he only wanted to tear him into pieces. Re-yip. Feng Chihua's palm struck empty air, as 4 Yun Che's appeared around him at the same time. Since Feng Chihua had plenty of experience, even though he was shocked, his mind had not been thrown into disorder. Instead of locking onto Yun Che's position, all the phoenix profound energy in his body rushed forth, launching out in all four directions. Bang! Yun Che quickly dodged behind Feng Chihua, then firmly smashed Dragon Fault on Feng Chihua's back. At the same time, Feng Chihua instantly ignited his profound energy, and also firmly struck Yun Che's chest. The two different forces exploded simultaneously, causing so much shaking that even the surrounding mountains violently trembled. A bloody flower burst out of Yun Che's chest, as he was ruthlessly knocked flying. Feng Chihua was even more miserable. He had been fiercely smashed to the ground by Dragon Fault, and then rolled far away like a gourd. A groove half a finger deep was smashed out onto his back. He used a palm to pound the ground and suddenly jumped up. Before he had time to stand firm, he suddenly discovered that the Yun Che he had sent flying was actually floating in midair. Then, Yun Che's entire body combusted with flame as he dove down like a shooting star. Empyrean Dance of the Phoenix Wing. What? Feng Chihua widened his eyes, not daring to believe the fact that Yun Che was actually in midair, and was even borrowing the power that knocked him into the air. His gaze darkened as a ball of extremely powerful phoenix flame ignited on the palm of his right hand. Contained in this palm was the unrestrained accumulation of all his strength, and he shot it at Yun Che within his raging roar. Facing against Feng Chihua's attack, Yun Che's descent had not diminished in the slightest, even the direction in which he was diving toward had not changed, as if he was willing to risk his life to receive Feng Chihua's attack in order to smash out a strike of his own. Once his all-out attack had come out, it was too late to retrieve it even if Feng Chihua wanted to. Facing Yun Che's fighting style, that was entirely trading a life for a life, Feng Chihua's eyes fixedly stared wide, and he explosively roared, "You're courting death." Boom! Yun Che's Dragon Fault and Feng Chihua's palm heavily struck the other party's body at the same time. Numerous blood vessels on Yun Che's arm ruptured instantly, as a huge expanse of blood burst from his chest. Several bones in his ribs and sternum broke apart, and several lines of gaps had even appeared on his internal organs. His entire person had been smashed over a height of 300 meters. While the sternum and ribs of Feng Chihua's left side were all jolted into pieces, the position of his heart directly shifted by an inch as streams of blood sprayed out of the wound like a geyser. He was unable to believe that he had actually been severely injured to such an extent by a strike from a junior at the Earth-Profound realm, while his own all-out attack had not smashed the other party into pieces. In fact, his power had not even entered the opponent's internal organs, and had actually been firmly resisted against. That kind of power, that kind of body, how could it only be at the Earth-Profound realm? How was that possible? In this brief exchange, the two were both completely covered in blood and injuries. This was because what Yun Che wanted was not an exchange, the preservation of his own life, nor Feng Chihua's defeat, rather, he wanted his death. In order to kill Feng Chihua, he had to throw out all his power into his attacks in these short dozen or so breaths, instead of dispersing his power and time to defend or evade. Sky Wolf / Without attending to his internal and external injuries, the mid-air Yun Che didn't wait for himself to regain his balance, as he placed all his strength on his heavy sword once more. The silhouette of the Sky Wolf howled as it charged toward Feng Chihua, furiously ramming onto his chest. Feng Chihua conjured all the strength within his body to rigidly block the Sky Wolf silhouette, but due to the extremely fast propelling force of the attack, he was pushed backwards. It was only after both his legs instantly plowed 2 ditches, over 30 meters long across the ground, did he barely offset Sky Wolf / smite. However, before he had time to gasp for breath, Yun Che had already fallen from the sky, blasting a strike over. Feng Chihua let out a loud cry as he condensed his flame into a sword. But this time, he didn't attack Yun Che, rather, he put all his strength on the Phoenix Flame sword to suppress Yun Che's heavy sword. Each one of Yunche's moves were executed without any concern to his own life, but how could Feng Zhihua willingly trade lives with Yunche? Against such a terrifyingly large power and the lunatic Yunche, who was trading injury for injury, his anger had already been rapidly replaced by dread and fear. With every single sword strike Yunche smashed out, several tens of blood vessels on his arm would burst open. Both his arms were instantly dyed with blood, as if they had just been submerged in a pool of blood. The wounds on his body endlessly spewed out blood, and the internal injuries in his body continually grew more severe, as he attacked without reserve. But he didn't mind it at all. Every single sword strike was vicious to the extreme. Boom. 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 Each strike from Yunche that Feng Zhihua blocked felt as though a mountain was ruthlessly ramming him, directly shaking him so hard that his internal organs felt like rupturing. Facing Yunche's blood-red eyes and the terrifying impact that passed through his arms, he began to genuinely grow fearful. At this time, under the suppression of Yunche's heavy sword, let alone retreating to escape, he couldn't even let out a single word. Yunche's vision had already changed into a field of hazy red, and only Zhihua remained in this red-colored world. The only thing in his heart was an abundant amount of killing intent. However, Feng Zhihua was still a high-level throne. Even if it was Yunche's attack in his strongest state, they were still blocked one after the other. Yunche's expression grew more overcast as a streak of cyan suddenly emitted out of his left arm. The lowest level profound handle was red, it became orange after possessing the dragon god's bloodline, then yellow under the evil soul state. Under the burning heart state, it became green, and now that he was in the purgatory state, it had shockingly become the same cyan Yun Sanghai possessed. Cyan-colored profound handle was equal to 1/2 of the user's strength. Under the state where he pushed himself to the limit, utilizing the profound handle would undoubtedly accelerate his energy consumption by a substantial amount and cause an intense battering of impact, which would lead to unpredictable consequences. However, in order to thoroughly suppress Feng Zhihua, Yunche nevertheless decided to use the profound handle. Bang! Feng Zhihua was already barely managing to withstand the heavy sword. Once the profound handle came out, he no longer had any energy left to obstruct that, and was firmly hit on the head with the profound handle. The sound of an explosion instantly came from his head as his entire person was knocking off flying. Then, he fell 150 meters away on the ground. He smashed out a large hole several meters deep with his head and upper body buried at the bottom of the large hole. You bass! Feng Zhihua released an animal-like roar as he ferociously leapt out of the large hole. His entire face was filled with blood, his complexion an even brighter red. On his forehead was shockingly a bloody dent the size of a fist. He was discomfited to the point where he appeared insane, but before had time to let out a flurry of curses, the figure before his eyes flashed. An ash-colored heavy sword ignited with phoenix flame once more appeared within his pupils, along with the cyan profound hand that had changed into a heavy sword. Feng Zhihua's eyes became scarlet as both hands clutched his sword. He threw in all his power into the flame sword before greeting Yunche's heavy sword and profound hand. Boom! In that instant, 3 short mountains near the two had simultaneously crashed down from the shaking. The mountains that had been reduced to level ground was as if a blood moon had risen. Inside the blood moon, all the boulders and trees had all been demolished into fine powder. The two people were dead leaves that had been caught in 2 separate storms as they lightly fluttered down in 2 different directions. Bang! Feng Zhihua's body fiercely smashed onto an ancient tree. He fell flipped over on the ground and violently coughed. Every cough would bring along a large amount of blood clots, as he nearly coughed out the smashed pieces of his internal organs out. However, even at such a state, he still didn't have time to gasp for breath, because Yunche's silhouette emerged before his eyes like a ghost once more. Yun Che's current condition looked even worse than his. His entire body was bloody. There wasn't a single spot on his face nor limbs that had not been dyed blood red. Especially the heavy sword he was grabbing onto with both hands. Streams and streams of blood flowed and dripped down. However, his imposing aura and demonic speed had not decreased in the slightest. Just as Feng Chihua's gaze captured him, in the next instant, Yun Che Star God's broken shadowed to his front. "You lunatic!" Feng Chihua's eyeballs were shocked to the point they had nearly burst out. Even though he had received Yun Che's heavy strike, Yun Che had obviously also received the strike that contained all his power. He also could see how gravely injured Yun Che was currently, but under such a conditions, he actually was not suppressing his wounds, rather, he was continuing his assault. Feng Chihua had lived for over 100 years. It wasn't as if he had never seen a lunatic before, but he had never seen a lunatic that had become crazed to this extent. He tightly gritted his teeth. Just as he was about to gather up all the profound energy within his body, his eyes suddenly enlarged. Reflected on his eyes was an azure blue dragon roaring up at the sky. Dragon Soul Domain. The soul-shaking dragon cry resounded through the skies of the Phoenix Mountain Range, making numbers fire profound beasts, all crouch on the ground while trembling in fear. Feng Chihua's entire body began shivering as deep fright continually condensed atop his face. The profound energy he had just conjured had quickly scattered under his fright. Yun Che's maintaining of the purgatory state was also quickly approaching its utmost limit. If he could, he really wanted to use destroying sky decimating earth to obliterate Feng Chihua, but due to the severeness of his internal injuries, his body was on the edge of collapse. If he used destroying sky decimating earth, his body would perhaps explode instantly. Using Dragon Soul Domain would overdraft his remaining power, making an enormous tear appear within his mental state. But under the circumstance of not being able to use destroying sky decimating earth, even if the price was huge, in order to put an end to this accident and completely eliminate Feng Chihua, he opened Dragon Soul Domain without hesitation. Not only would Dragon Soul Domain allow him to hit his target, the most important thing it did was forcing all of the opponent's profound energy defense to completely disintegrate. If it was under normal circumstances, as a high-level throne, the effects of Dragon Soul Domain would lessen by a great amount to Feng Chihua. But due to all the injuries on his body had greatly disorientated Feng Chihua. With his mind mostly crushed, Yun Che suddenly charged in with the last of his gathered power condensed on top of both his hands. Falling moon sinking star. The heavy sword lifted, phoenix flame rose. Dragon Fault, which bore the last of Yun Che's strength, brought along the aura of a death god as it smashed toward Feng Chihua's heart. Confronted with the fast-approaching death, Feng Chihua instinctively extended both his hands to protect his front within his trembling terror, barely managing to set up a profound energy defensive barrier. Boom! The ground burst open. Under his crumbling state of mind, Feng Chihua's constructed defense popped like a weak soap bubble. In the midst of the world-shaking sound, lines and lines of cracks rapidly spread beneath his feet, directly extending to more than 300 meters. As for Feng Chihua, he had completely disappeared from his line of sight. It was not known how deep his body had been sunk deep into the ground. Pitter-patter. Pitter-patter. Fresh blood flowed from the webs of Yun Che's fingers like pearls from a broken string, quickly trickling drip by drip onto the ruins underfoot. His previous all-out attack made countless cracks appear on his entire body. Blood dyed his body, making him resemble a bloody demon god, an Azura coming out of the battlefield. Even the wind brushing past his body carried the pungent smell of blood. Finally, over. Bang! Dragon Fault powerlessly dropped from Yun Che's hands. In the midst of its heavy landing sound, the red light in Yun Che's eyes disappeared. The profound handle had also returned back in his arm as his eyes slowly closed. After his entire body swayed, he finally heavily fell onto the ground. When he had decided that he had to kill Feng Chihua, he knew that this battle would be a terribly brutal one. Because with his current strength, wanting to kill a high-level throne required him to pay an extremely large cost. He had finally succeeded. An earth-profound killing a late-stage emperor profound, he could be said to have created a never-before-seen legend in the profound sky continent. This outcome's crucial point stemmed from the very first time he had caught Feng Chihua off guard and destroyed an arm. Otherwise, even in a state where he forced himself to the limit, it would be difficult for him to suppress Feng Chihua. Have to, quickly, leave this place. Yun Che struggled to stretch out an arm. Pressing the dirty before him, he had to exhaust almost all his strength to crawl a few inches forward. What he ought to do now should be tending to his wounds, but this place was Phoenix Mountain Rage, Divine Phoenix Sect's territory. Below him, still existed the Great Phoenix Formation. The sounds of his battle with Feng Chihua was extremely loud. It was quite possible that it had already alerted a few members of the Divine Phoenix Sect. If he didn't leave right away, the consequences would be unthinkable. Forget about whether the person who came over was a throne, even the lowest level disciple in Divine Phoenix Sect could take his life. He looked at his left hand and continuously summoned for the Snow Phoenix. However, even though the profound seal had flashed a multiple number of times, the Snow Phoenix still had never appeared. The profound seal had not disappeared, proof that the Snow Phoenix had not died yet. However, Feng Chihua's attack was enough to make it seriously injured to the point of near death. Huff! Huff! Heavy moans of pain suddenly came from the direction where Yun Che held out his hand. Furthermore, it sounded far, yet near. Yun Che's complexion changed. Little by little, he turned his head around. A hand suddenly appeared from the very edge of the ravine carved out by a sky wolf slash. Then, a completely bloody figure slowly crawled up. Feng Chihua. Drats, he's not dead yet. Jasmine said in a low voice. It could be said that the current Feng Chihua was at his most miserable state. His entire body had been badly mutilated, not the least bit of a human's appearance could be seen, but he was actually clearly alive. Moreover, judging by how quick he was climbing out of that ravine, it was clear that his condition was at least comparatively better than Yun Che's. Impossible. Under Dragon Soul Domain. He basically had no power to defend. How could he not have died? Feng Chihua, who had climbed up, swayed as he stood up. Seeing the bloody Yun Che sprawled on the ground, he continued to sway as he let out a coarse yet crazed laughter. Ha! Ha ha! Ha 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 ha! How could a little bastard like you kill me? He advanced forward. As he stepped closer to Yun Che, a terrifying maliciousness surfaced on his face. I'm going to tear your entire body, bit by bit, thoroughly into shreds. Right at this time, an enormous silhouette suddenly swept over from overhead, accompanied by a somewhat frail long cry. Yun Che struggled to lift his head. After that, wild joy rose within his eyes. Little Chan. Half of the snowy feathers on the Snow Phoenix had become the color of blood, but it still strongly flew over. As it flew above Yun Che, both its wings swatted and 3 streaks of gleaming cold icicles launched straight at Feng Chihua. Pew pew pew. If it was in normal circumstances, how could the Snow Phoenix's attack possibly harm Feng Chihua? But Feng Chihua's body was currently utterly broken, even his steps were unstable, so it was simply impossible for him to defend against the Snow Phoenix's attack. The 3 icicles easily pierced right through Feng Chihua's body. Included among them was one that struck a fist-sized bloody hole through his throat. Feng Chihua's eyes rounded. Under the icicle attack, he heavily fell backwards and moved no more. Beneath his body was a quickly expanding large pool of blood. This time, he was dead to the point where he could no longer die. He had perhaps thought about how his life would end, but he never would have thought that he would die so tragically, nor would he have imagined that he would die under the hands of a profound practitioner of the earth-profound realm and his contracted sky-profound beast. Yun-Che let out a deep breath of relief. As his mind relaxed, the side effects of using Dragon's soul domain violently surged up, making his greatly impacting his consciousness into a muddled state. He extended a hand at the Snow Phoenix and said in a hoarse voice, "Little Chan. Let's go, the higher the better, the farther the better." The Snow Phoenix conjured up a light breeze, lifting Yun-Che up on its back. Then, it flapped his wings, flying high into the skies. Yun-Che's heart was at long last settled somewhat, and it was just at this time that Jasmine's cold voice suddenly sounded, "You'd best stay conscious. You should know why it had not immediately arrived after you had called it so many times. It's inevitable that its wounds are extremely severe, not only that, it had been injured in the wings. Even though it managed to fly now, I doubt that it could fly far." Yun-Che. Jasmine definitely didn't say that just to scare him. Yun-Che bit the tip of his tongue, allowing himself a brief period of consciousness. He immediately felt the Snow Phoenix's entire body tremble acutely. Usually, when it encountered a large gale, it would still fly smoothly, but now, a casual mountain breeze blowing over would cause its body to violently sway. "Little Chan. You can do it." Yun-Che yelled softly. If he could not fly out of Phoenix Mountain range, he would definitely die. However, he had obviously underestimated the Snow Phoenix beast's injuries. After struggling to fly over a few kilometers, a strong breeze came head-on. Under this strong breeze, the Snow Phoenix immediately let out a painful cry as both wings suddenly spasmed before it dropped down. "Little Chan." In front of Yun-Che's shout, the Snow Phoenix didn't react at all, because it had already fainted in midair. Yun-Che possessed the Phoenix bloodline, the Dragon God's bloodline, the protection of the True God's profound arts, and a completely changed body. So no matter how serious of an injury he obtained, he could still endure. But the Snow Phoenix was different. It was only an ordinary sky-profound beast. Struggling to fly for so long with its grave injuries was already its limit. Following the Snow Phoenix's mid-air collapse, Yun-Che didn't even have the energy to clutch at its snowy wings, and was slowly separated from the Snow Phoenix as they fell. Not long after they fell, Yun-Che's body heavily smashed into soil that wasn't even that hard. It was apparently a huge slanted slope, because after he fell, he quickly rolled downwards with the Snow Phoenix beast. As he rolled, his half-conscious vision saw the place they were tumbling toward. It was actually an extremely steep cliff. He saw various mountain peaks over the cliff, and none were higher than the mountain peak he was currently rolling down from. In that split second, he immediately understood that he and the Snow Phoenix had fallen on top of that highest mountain peak in Phoenix Mountain Range. They were currently tumbling down from highest summit, from an altitude of over 4,500 meters. His body had finally tumbled down the cliff, then, his tumbling changed into a sharp drop. With his head facing upwards, he couldn't see the ground beneath him. He didn't know if the upper part of the mountain, or the middle of the mountain was beneath him, or if he would directly drop to the bottom of the mountain. The whistling of the wild wind swept over, with his mind and body severely overspent along with his grave injuries. He was unable to control his body that was currently in mid-air, so much that he was unable to conjure up any profound energy defense. He wasn't sure if the bloodline he obtained from gods and his powerful natural defense could withstand the force of impact he would receive from falling under a state in which he had no profound energy defense. Whether or not his body and bones would directly be torn and crushed. The howling of the wind drowned out all other sounds. Aside from the whistling of the wind, there was nothing in Yun-Che's consciousness. He didn't even have the strength to scream. After several tens of breaths passed, the sound of the wind beside his ears still screamed out. Until finally, Bang! He heard the enormous sound of himself falling and the barely discernible fearful cry of a girl. All the painful sensations in his entire body quickly faded away along with his fuzz consciousness. Half of the last scene he saw was the tall mountain cliff, and the other half was the blue sky. Then, the face of a girl that was as beautiful as a dream appeared from the blue sky. Her wide eyes were even brighter than the stars gazed at him. These eyes were as pure as the bright moon, brimming with sincerity, horror, astonishment, and curiosity. Yun-Che had seen many beautiful women, but this illusory beauty in front of him still caused his mind to uncontrollably shake. So beautiful. Is it a fairy, from the heavens? This image of a beauty that should not belong in the mortal world became the last thing Yun-Che was conscious of. After that, he completely lost consciousness. Episode 65 is end here. Next episode coming tomorrow. Thanks for watching.